Today's chapter is an easy one. Please ask me questions so I can explain input-output for Visual Logic, Python, etc., formatting especially. But first, let's cover chapter 4. In pseudocode, we use print for output, of course, but get for input, okay? Get will read any type of variable, string, number, etc. And we'll discuss a few other things. Let me skip the table of contents. So, actually, this is a small mistake because we should be discussing output first, okay? So coming back to output is anything that's produced by the computer, including sound, anything on the monitor, printer, etc. Of course, for the most part, we deal only with the monitor. Then you cut and paste it to the printer. So this is the pseudocode. Print and anything like a constant like this, a string like this. You could have variables, you could have expressions. In pseudocode, we are not very strict. You can combine a string with a number, with a plus sign, it doesn't matter. Okay. Now, this is where we should have input. Input is anything you put into the computer, right? For example, with a microphone, keyboard, mouse, any of these are input devices. So, of course, for the keyboard, we use get, and this is an example. Get current age is a variable, so you would type a number in. And this should, again, be with print. This for concatenation, or putting two things together. It also means addition, so unfortunately, there's some confusion between what happens in pseudocode, but hopefully it will become clearer in the next couple of slides. Any questions so far? Okay. So these are some examples of gets and prints. Print can have a single string like this or a string concatenated to a number. Now in Python, of course, you would use str over here, right? Because str of current age. We'll come to that. The Python details are coming up. If you use a comma, it doesn't matter. It's still concatenation, but it may throw in a blank or two. Okay? So in this example, this is a prompt. It's a good idea to print something out before waiting for something to be read in, right? Otherwise, the user wouldn't know what your program expects, a name or a number or what. So if you type in 18, 19 or any number here, it will print this out for this print statement. So this is a combination of gets and prints. Now in pseudocode, you always print something out and then get something. You don't combine the two, but in Python you can. Okay? And in Visual Logic also you can. Any question? Okay. So this is a simple chapter. We've seen most of the ideas. Again, this pseudocode. There's a small difference between pseudocode and Python. Not very large. For example, again, if you're using a plus sign here and a plus here, in pseudocode it does not make any difference because it's not meant to be run on a computer, right? So as long as it conveys the information, that's good enough. So it will print out 12 here, 2 slashes. We are using Python-like notation. We'll give you 12. Any questions? Okay. Now this should clarify some of the ideas. Print 2 plus 2. Now there are no double quotes anywhere. So this is a simple addition. If either side has a string, it would be a concatenation. That's all. And if one is a number, the other is a string, it will still be a concatenation by default. That's our understanding. That's our assumption in pseudocode. There's no real rule or anything, but we're just assuming that's correct. So do you have any questions on these examples? Okay, constants. Let's take an example of this assignment statement. For constants, you usually just assign a value to the constant once in the program, not using input statements or anything, just an assignment statement like this. And use all capital letters, and therefore we use underscores to separate it, the words, and make it more readable. Now, of course, if you have a single letter like capital X equal to 75, we will assume that it's a constant. If we have a small x equal to 75, we'll assume it's a variable, so we can change the value of x. And that's the reason for that convention, camel notation. You always start with this lowercase letter. We'll come to some examples in a few minutes. So for naming a constant, these are very simple rules. All the letters must be capitalized, and the first letter cannot be a number, otherwise causes confusion. Any questions on this? Of course, I could just have days and not in year or anything, right? All capital. Now, this is just a convention. In Python, it makes no difference. Python will treat this like any other variable, and therefore you can change days and year any number of times. Okay? There's no distinction between constants and variables. Now, in other languages like Java or C, you have to say this is a constant, semicolon, int of type integer, etc., etc. So that clarifies what's a constant, what's a variable. But we are not studying C++, C, or Java, right? You'll probably study that in 135. So once again, we are talking about pseudocode here, not Python. But it's better to stick to that convention if you're writing a Python program or Visual Logic, right? Visual Logic makes no distinction between uppercase, lowercase letters. In Visual Logic, if I use days or if I use days, it's the same variable in both cases. Any letter can be uppercase or lowercase in that. And again, there's no distinction between variables and constants, right? Only in pseudocode we are making that distinction as a convention, because don't you think it's easy to read the rest of the program and make an assumption that this is a constant, it will not change? And it's good to make something like 365 a constant. So just in case you think of a leap year and make it 366 later, then it will still be called days in year, right? Throughout the program. It's not good to use this magic number. This is called a magic number usually, because sometimes it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, of course, if I say pi is 3.14 or something, then I decide to refine my program, I can add 14159 later on, right? So it's a good idea to make that a constant in your program. I can't think of any other good reason. Can anyone think of any good reason for that, for having constants in your program?
If you're doing like a scientific program and you're trying to figure out gravity or whatever,
Yeah.
gravitational constants.
Yeah, it's more readable, right? The program becomes more readable rather than use in my entire program somewhere if I use, this used to happen a long time ago. If I write a program, I find the area equals, well, area equals 3.14 times something, okay? And then later on I might use the value of pi as 3.1415 and something else later on. So this style of programming is confusing. So it's better to have constants than not to have constants. There are no, good reasons, but these are some of them. The best reason is that you have it in one place and you can change it once and for all throughout the program. Or you might decide to make it a float, 365.25 or something. Okay? So these constants can be of any type, integers, float, or a string. So again, this is an example. You can use constants anywhere you would use a variable, like in this print statement, in pseudocode. Again, we are not looking at Python yet. We'll come to that. Any questions on that? Of course, it will print just one string, combination of all this. Now, Python, why do we need str here and here? Because otherwise, this is a number, and you cannot combine a string with a number. Okay? If you try and do that, if you concatenate a string and a number, you get an error message. We'll come to that example also. So a few more details. This is an old problem you've seen before, I think in chapter 1 or 2. You're given the miles per gallon that a car gets and the number of miles you have traveled. So you've got to calculate the miles. No, the number of gallons consumed. You're given these two on the right side. You have to calculate miles per gallon. Very simple problem. So this demonstrates complete pseudocode with gets and prints. Why is this print useful? Because you know what to type in, right? Number of miles. Again, this tells you type in number of gallons consumed. Now, there's no idea about whether number of miles is a fraction or a whole number. So it can be either one. It can be an integer, it can be a float. But then the rest of the program may or may not work correctly as expected. So when we come to Python, then it becomes more important to be more precise, whether it's float or integer. But the algorithm remains the same, right? For either case. So up to this point, you're collecting information, input, and then you're processing it, and then output, IPO. Any questions on this pseudocode? Just to indicate it's pseudocode, we have start and end to clarify it. Okay, let's skip this. Here's another simple problem. You have to read in number of hours worked for an employee, the rate of pay, and figure out the total pay, gross pay. So again, input, processing, and output. And this is not complete pseudocode. To be more precise, you should show a prompt before hours worked and all that, right? So this is just a list of tasks, what you need to do. And this is the complete pseudocode. Have a print statement and then a corresponding get, another print, corresponding get, calculation, and print out. So I think I ran this or something very similar in one of these past week or two. Flowcharts. Really there's no difference, but we're just focusing on input-output here, the parallelogram. Now in Visual Logic, it's tilted one way for input and the other way for output. It makes no difference really. If you do it one way or another, it makes no difference at all. And there are some additional symbols which will come across, a diamond shaped thing for if statements and loops. So once again, the flowchart corresponding to the pseudocode is this. Now I forgot, or we forgot to put, to make it correspond even more to the pseudocode, don't you think we should have a print here and a print here to indicate what needs to be read in? The answer is yes. And along with this, a printout of what you're trying to tell the user, miles per gallon. This would just print the value, that's all. And I noticed a lot of you turn in assignments saying the cost, instead of saying the cost to fill the pool is 7,200 cents, you just print the output 7,200. Now, what does that mean? Is it in cents? Is it in dollars? What is it? And what does 7,200 mean? Is it a cost or is it the volume of the pool, etc.? So you should always print a message before a print statement and a message before each get statement. I can't think of anything else to add. This is a very simple example. And for the other problem, where you have pay rate, number of hours, or is it the same? Let's see. Yeah, it's a different problem, the second problem. That's the flow chart. And again, we left out the prints before the two gets and a message before gross pay. Okay, now the Python details, and I'll come to Visual Logic details and give you an example or two. In Python, prints always have pair of parentheses like these, right? In version 3.0 or beyond. In the older version of Python, you don't have to put the parentheses. You need a space here. But we are working with the later versions, so you can actually combine these two statements as this is the prompt, it prints this out, it does inside out, right? And then reads the input from the keyboard, converts it to an integer, and then assigns it to current age. Or you can do it in two steps like this, but there's no advantage to doing it this way. I always do it like this. Some people find this clearer. Yes?
So the print get was only applicable to the pseudocode.
Correct. And input is applicable to Python.
Very good.
And Visual Logic is still different, right? Just the type of box indicates what type of statement it is. Okay. So once again, why do we need str in Python? First of all, you need to have parentheses for a print, and then you can't combine a string with a number. Okay, you've got to follow the rules of Python. In pseudocode, it doesn't make any difference, right? In fact, this would not be good pseudocode either, because there's no int in pseudocode, there's no input in pseudocode, there's get in place of this, right? So we have to stick to the rules for each of the three things, Visual Logic or flowchart, sort of similar, pseudocode or Python, they're all different. And they're not that difficult to understand, right? So this is what happens. If you try and print a string and a plus sign and current age, a number, it gives you an error message like this. Can't convert from an integer, this integer object, to a string object implicitly. You got to use str explicitly to do the conversion. Now if you use a comma, that's a different matter. Oops, I pressed the wrong button here. Okay, this screen has a few buttons on the left side. Um, so this is the explanation of why you need str. Now for a string, you don't need str. There's no point converting a string to a string, right? But Python doesn't mind, doesn't care if you put str off all this also. I noticed that some of you had the following situation, and that also is redundant. There's no harm, but it's better to leave it out. Suppose I have x equal to float of input of enter miles. Then x is already a float. Later on, there's no point in doing this. Y equals something times or whatever the statement might be, float of x. But it works in Python. It doesn't care if x is already a float, converting it to a float does nothing, right? I've noticed already that some of the programs have that. Why convert it twice, right? There's no point. So actually, the simpler the program, the easier it is to understand. So I always convert something to a number right away and not use it here as far as possible. Okay? And again, that's convention. Python doesn't care doing it either way. You could just, if I had it like this, then I must use float of x here later on, or int, because whatever I type in is a string. Okay? So I always put double quotes around all my strings. Any questions on that? Okay. So once again in Python, if you use a plus sign here, you got to use str here. And once you have a string, you can combine the three strings together, right? Can you have a comma here but a plus here? Plus here but a comma here? Yes. Now it might introduce a blank or two if it feels like it in that case. But if you use a plus, then every single blank here counts and here too, and it won't introduce extra blanks. Okay? So finally, the program to compute miles per gallon is this. Now miles is a variable. It starts with lowercase m, gallons is a variable. Miles per gallon is 3 words, so P and G are capitalized, and so on. If I wanted to use a plus here, I have to use an str around miles per gallon. That's all. I know I'm emphasizing a few things too much, but it's better to clarify that now than worry about it later. Now, once again, capital P for print, lowercase p for print makes no difference in pseudocode, because I can understand either one, but for Python it does make a difference. You got to have a lowercase print. Okay. We're at the end of the chapter, but let me just show you 3 or 4 other things. First, I'll do the visual logic, course information. This guide is very helpful. Let me open it and show you the important parts, which I may not have. If you get a message like this, then you know there's an error, right? And perhaps it explains what the error is, but that's not the important point here. So output boxes are this shape, and the input boxes are slanted the other way. What was important here? Yes, printing two things out. Here, this is a good example, or three things out in this case. Your name is a variable for them. Ampersand is used instead of plus. Okay? If you try and use plus, you'll get an error message of some type. So you're going to print this, and this, and this, and this. Four things. And visual logic is allows you to print a string or a number. It does not care. You don't have to use str. Do not use str. It's not a function known to visual logic. So this is an example, this is another example. For output expression, for the box to be filled in, output box. Okay, there was one more little thing. The prompts, yeah. Input box prompt. I think it was earlier than that. Yes, this is the prompt. So if you fill in the prompt, it'll print that out. If you don't fill anything here, it'll print out, please enter your name, or some default sentence like that. Okay? So it's better to put in the prompt. I don't think there's a whole lot here except for currency format. Yeah, that is useful and important. So currency format, see, these are examples without formatting the price here. They talk about format currency. This is the correct way to do that. So if you have a value for unit price and use format currency, then you get this $7.95 printed out. If the value is $7.95. If it was $7.953, it will still print out $7.95, right? If it was 7.957, it will round it up to 7.96. Correct? So format currency is very useful. I thought it was currency format, but and this table is very important, very useful. So this tells you about integer division and mod. That's about it. But please read this carefully. We still have to discuss if statements and loops. We'll come back. And Boolean expressions comes later in chapter 5. So let me stop this and go back to code samples. Now, out of these, the most useful one is called format. This one shows you how to convert numbers. So let me just run that. And the others, I've told you before that except for this, all the others are useful. Example 4a is complicated, but you can of course read it. It's not very difficult to understand. Let me just see what this is about, the example. Yeah, that's with an if statement. We'll come to that. So let's not worry about that. Format is the most important. And then, of course, type. I mentioned type, which is useful. You can always print the type of variable at that point. So in this case, it will print out float and int for b. But then if you assign it a string later on, the type of a changes to str or string. Okay? So that's useful. But the most useful is format, like I said. So let me open it with idle and discuss it for a few minutes, and then I'm done with this. Okay. Now this is a float number, right? Which is assigned to variable pay. If you print it out plain like this, it will not print a $sign in front of it. It thinks of it as a number, not currency value. So this says print a $sign in front of that number and format pay according to this string 0:.2f. Now let me explain whatever I know about it. I don't know every detail. The F is for float numbers. So pay is float, right? So F works for float. F may not work with the rate, which is an integer. And the D may not work with pay because D is for integers. Okay, this is easier to understand. Let me explain this first. This says don't print any leading blanks, 0 leading blanks. Okay, and then in two places print the value for rate. So it will be blank 6. The output will be blank 6. If I said 3 places, then it will be blank blank 6, etc. And see, there's no decimal point here. But this says print 2 decimal places after the decimal point. So let's run it and compare and change the value a little bit and see. Okay. A little bit higher. Okay. So this is printed out as is. And this with the $sign. And this is a blank 6, right? Now let me change it a little bit. Unfortunately, I'll have to change it back again. Otherwise, my example will be messed up a little bit. So if I run it again, this is what I get. It's a little hard to see both, but this will probably work just a little bit lower. Okay. So this is unformatted output. This says now print out in 3 places after the decimal point. So we have 3 places here. And this also says 3 places. So we have blank, blank, and 6. Okay. Now I like to keep my format simple. I'm not going to get more complex than any of these two examples. Okay. And I will not ask you formatting questions on the test because it can become complicated, especially if it's wrong. So do you have any questions on this?
What does the 0 colon do again?
0 colon means don't print any blank before this, before the number. Otherwise, if I say, okay, for that to be absolutely precise, I'll have to go to python.org and look it up. Okay. If I put, let's change it. Yeah, let's put a 1 and see what happens. It might put a blank space somewhere. See, tuple index out of range. So you get an error. I've always used 0. I don't know what that means. So let's look it up on python.org. And I'll change this example back to what it was. Otherwise, it may be confusing for later on. Okay. So that's what it was, and it runs fine. Okay. And just out of curiosity, let's go to python.org and look it up. Documentation. Okay, you don't have to go to that. You go to tutorial. That's easier. Do you see tutorial anywhere? Documentation, tutorial, beginner's guide. Okay, that's probably better. There's also a search command somewhere. So let's search for format. Okay, this is how complicated it is. Field name, conversion, etc., colon, format spec, which can be any of this. So examples. Let's see if it has format examples. Did not return a result. Okay, so does anyone see tutorial anywhere? I think I got it from tutorials, but I could be wrong. This was 4 or 5 years ago. Well, we can search for tutorial, right? Start with our beginner's guide. I don't see the search box. Here it is. I guess there's no choice except to, yes, looking for something specific. Okay. It's a little bit hard to navigate through all this, so I'll give up in a minute if I can't find it. Or if anyone has any hints on what to look for. We can try one more time. Formatting integers or format. String formatting. Again, I think it's better to give up and you can do your own search, okay? But either I got that example from a book or from here. By the way, it's been running under 2.7.8 all along, apparently. So it's apparently no difference. There might be a slight difference between 3.2 and 2.7.8. But I'll stop here rather than waste a lot of time on this. Okay? Just follow this. For this class, this example is sufficient. And there must be something for strings also, you might as well ask me. But I don't know what it is. Maybe using an S or something. Trial and error is not the best way to go. The tutorial on python.org is much better. I just showed you the general description of format. Okay, I'm going to stop here. If you have any questions, I'll continue. I mean, work on your assignments, etc., and I'll help you with that. Otherwise, you're free to leave, of course, if you're caught up with all the homework.